the mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
The views and opinions expressed by A Little Bit Culty are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast. Any content provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business individual, anyone, or anything. Hey everybody, I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony Ames, aka Nippy.
And we just want to welcome you to season 3 of A Little Bit Culty. Once upon a time, we were in a cult called NXIVM.
We didn't know it was a cult when we joined, because as a wise man once said, nobody joins a cult. They join a good thing.
For a minute, it was a good thing. That's where we met, fell in love, got married, started a family.
The stuff of storybooks.
Even the part where we woke up, escaped, became whistleblowers, and helped bring it all down. You call that shit show a storybook?
Seeing the mastermind of NXIVM get sentenced to 120 years in prison? That's a storybook ending, if you ask me.
The whole thing was captured on HBO's hit docuseries, The Vow.
A new season is coming out any moment, if it isn't out already by the time you hear this.
And I published a memoir called Scarred, which is available anywhere books are sold.
And now we have a podcast.
Every week on A Little Bit Culty, we call on experts, advocates, fellow survivors, and whistleblowers to help us unpack what's going on in the cultiverse.
And now we're turning our story into wisdom for other people.
Like, I wish I'd known that calling yourself Vanguard was a bit of a red flag.
Yeah, big red flag. We've got a lot to cover. So let's get this show rolling, shall we?
Welcome to A Little Bit Culty, an Acast podcast about the fads, beliefs, and trends that blur the line between devotion and destruction. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And to learn more, visit us on Instagram or alittlebitculty.com.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to it, my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Hello, everyone. Whose birthday is it?
It's Ace Boy's birthday. Ace turns 3 today.
3 years ago today.
Well, 3 years ago last night.
Oh, that's right. Daddy decided that you weren't going to have the kid tonight because you were late. And I was like, it's not coming tonight. Smoke a doob, have a Guinness.
And then my water broke.
All of a sudden, then Sarah's water broke.
Let's just say he was very relaxed.
I was very relaxed.
It set the mood. It was good.
It did.
Ace's birthday in our timeline and also in our reality, we just got back from Southwest, which was such a good trip.
Could have gone better.
Could not have gone better. It was so magical, and more on that very shortly. But breaking news, this is our season finale. But we're not taking any time off between seasons this time. We are cruising right into season 4 on April 4th. That's 4/4/22. That's like a numerology wet dream.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Here's another number we like. Nippy?
We broke 70,000 downloads.
This week. And I think that's largely because people are devouring the interview that we did with Sarma after they watched Bad Vegan on Netflix. And truly, the feedback has been...
Well, it's been mostly positive. No, it's been mostly positive.
Equal parts reaffirming. The feedback has been a mixture out there in the world, but really on our channel, very positive and super supportive of Sarma. But out in the world, horrifying.
I've only seen a couple. I mean, that's to be expected though, right?
The thing that people are reacting to is that, you know, if you're watching this and you have no concept of coercive control, the filmmakers, in our opinion, like really irresponsibly, made the end sort of very misleading.
Well, I guess it's what we were saying earlier. Most people get it if they've been through something, lived enough life, right? And the people who don't know what they're looking at, I don't think the filmmakers did a very good job of explaining coercive control so that people who haven't had that experience can understand what it looks like. We can help Sarma do what we did, just turn, a negative into a positive. And, you could see that the documentary not getting the whole story as an opportunity for Sarma to fill it in. because it didn't seem like the documentary was particularly interested in that.
When we launched our episode last week, we said that we had talked to Sarma, who just watched it, and said generally she was happy, although she wanted to clear a few things up. I don't think she realized at that point how much people would interpret the ending as if perhaps she's a villain in any sense. And I think that it's really too bad because she knows and has shared with us that the director has actually interviewed experts and people who are cult members, and why they didn't include that to explain what actually happened to her. And it's like the facts are the facts. And it's disturbing to me. I think it's really irresponsible.
Yeah, I think the doc missed an opportunity.
It's complicated. And also we've noticed a very big difference in responses across platforms. Like Twitter is a toxic stew. Lots of people taking cheap shots from ivory towers and cesspools.
I've always said Twitter is the bathroom wall of social media.
Yeah, we're thinking about getting off it. I rarely look at it, to be honest.
Yeah.
For those I interact with, it's all over Instagram. We're here for the survivors. We're so amazed by how many people have spoken up to say that they saw so much of their own experience in Sarma's story, and how the fucked up Mr. Fox is a very familiar character in real life to so many people who've survived narcissistic abuse. So thank you to every single one of you who've rallied around Sarma, and really every one of our guests. You guys are the light. Thank you. Logistically, we are still hoping to have a follow-up conversation with Sarma, and she can speak to some of the things that people have questions about. But the main one I want to say is that the phone conversation at the end, which makes it sound like she's still in touch with him or somehow is like on good terms with him, that's not the case. That was recorded on purpose with the filmmaker's full knowledge of Sarma trying to capture him saying some weird shit on camera to prove and like show the dynamic. She's not cozying up to him. She's not still in touch with him. And she's certainly not the villain. More on that to come. So here's the deal. For our season finale, we wanted you to hear our live South by Southwest show with Amanda Montell and Sarah Berman. It's a different format for us, as live as it gets, but we think you'll like it. Will you please let us know? Just don't troll us. Thanks.
Here's our episode with Amanda Montell and Sarah Berman, live in Austin, Texas, South by.
Enjoy. Hi, guys. Welcome to the first Little Bit Culty live show ever.
Hello, Austin.
This is so wild. It's our first live show. It's the first time we've ever interviewed two people at the same time, and the first time that Nippy and I are wearing matching gold Nikes also on the same stage. So it's kind of a big deal today. Thank you for coming.
Today.
Yeah, went gold. Thank you. So is anyone not familiar with Little Bit Culty? Just curious? Okay. We'll give you some backstory. I'm Sarah Edmondson. I'm the host. This is my handsome husband, Nippy Ames, to my left, the co-host. And
to my left, we have two people that have own little real estate in my heart. They are the two first people that I thought of when we were picking co-hosts to read with. To my immediate left, we have Amanda Montell, owner of Cultish. The
author?
language
Owner.
author.
I own it.
You're kind of the owner, too. Author of Cultish, gets into the language of cults and how they abuse language to get you hooked. She's also an NYU grad with a degree in linguistics and the co-host of Sounds Like a Cult. To the far left over here, we have Sarah Berman,
Hello.
author of Don't Call It a Cult, the shocking story of Keith Raniere and the women of Nexium.
It's very shocking.
She's also former editor at Vice.
Hello.
So you may sense a theme here. I'm not sure if it's jumping out at you.
What's that theme?
Cults.
Oh.
Yeah. Any cult fans in the audience? I'm assuming that's how you ended up here, which is great. Yay, yay, welcome. Okay, so for those people who aren't familiar with our backstory, I'm going to give you really quick Cliff Notes. Okay, so Nippy and I were in a personal and professional development program for 12 years. And turned out it was that, but also behind closed doors, the leader had a harem and was branding some of the members with his initials. That happened to me. It's obviously what woke me up.
You weren't in his harem.
We were not in it. I was not in his harem, but I did get branded. I'm married to Nippy, although he did try to break us up, but that he failed. We woke up. We became whistleblowers. I was on the cover of the New York Times. There's a 9-part docuseries called The Vow on HBO. You may have heard of it. And then after that, people wanted to know more. So we decided in the time of COVID, what else are we doing? Do a podcast. So here we are, and our goal is to shine a light on the red flag so people have that template so they understand what to look for when they're invited to a group or a party or a
whatever it may be. And we also want to help people who are in such groups get out and to heal. We talk to whistleblowers, survivors, and experts, and
our main theme, when Sarah and I had this opportunity to do this, was to really shine a light on how the abuses of power that went on in cult-like environments are the same abuses of power that go on in other things, and they're not proprietary to cults. So recognizing the precursors and symptoms of things, you can recognize that's a pattern of abuse early. And we've had a lot of people that have been in similar situations reach out to us because of our podcast and say, because of this, I was able to recognize early that this was going on, and ultimately, get to the point where you're not in a really abusive situation. So that's the theme that we can do. We stay pretty disciplined in staying in that lane, because I think that's where our wisdom lies. And we have some other hosts that have a lot more wisdom as well over here.
And our goal today is to go beyond the headlines, for those of you who are familiar with the story, a little bit behind the scenes with someone who is an expert in the linguistics of cults. And in this case, Sarah Berman, who is the only reporter and journalist to be at the Keith Raniere trial for every single day. So she's got some...
One of the only.
One of the only.
Right. One of very few.
But you're still very special.
Thank you.
Yeah. Join our cult.
That's called love bombing.
Well, I also think it's important to say, like, one of the reasons Sarah was I wanted Sarah on there is because we had a lot of journalists nipping at our heels in this thing, and Sarah was one of the people that demonstrated the requisite compassion and asking the right questions, I think, to be up here and
Oh, thank you.
be responsible for the tour. Yes. Thank you.
So just to lay a foundation, we're going to start it off with, do you want to give the nickname? Nippy, for those of you who follow our podcast, Nippy likes to give nicknames for our friends and guests.
This is dark stuff that we talk about.
Yeah, so we
and I
have
like
to
to
make
add
it
a little
light.
levity to it, but I call Amanda No-Tell Montell.
Also known as the 5'1" power pellet.
Yes.
So, Amanda, why don't you kick it off for us and tell us a little bit about the definition of cults?
Sure. Well, my book is about the language of cults, from Scientology all the way to SoulCycle. So interpreting cults to mean this wide spectrum of groups. And I was hoping that when I started my research for the book, talking to linguists and sociologists, psychologists, religious studies scholars, that my personal understanding of the word cult would become clearer and more succinct. But in fact, the opposite occurred, and my understanding of this word only became more fluid and more nebulous. And that's because the word cult can really apply to this wide range of groups nowadays, from a group as destructive as NXIVM or Jonestown or Heaven's Gate, all the way to groups that are sort of teetering on that line, like multi-level marketing schemes. And then on the most constructive or ethical end, you have groups like, certain sports fandoms, although that shit can get toxic, as well as, a really popular beauty brand or a festival. And this wide myriad of interpretations of the word cult really says something about our culture's super fraught relationship with ideas of community and spirituality and identity and meaning. For better and for worse, the word cult can really be used to apply to any group. For better and for worse, there is now a cult for everyone. And while the word cult can be incredibly illuminating when you're trying to communicate the gravity of certain abuse, like when you were whistleblowing on NXIVM, of course you were going to use the word cult because it does conjure negative images in most people's minds. But at the same time, the word cult can be so subjective and so judgment loaded that it itself is not enough all the time to be able to illuminate what particular dangers are on the table with any given group. So it's a more nuanced conversation than that. And that's kind of the overview on the word cult.
Thank you. And what is your personal connection to the cultiverse? The cultiverse. Yeah, well, I grew up fascinated by fanatical fringe groups because my dad spent his teenage years against his will in a pretty notorious cult called Synanon. I've actually heard Synanon described as sort of the NXIVM of its day. It was also like a personal improvement sort of group. It was pitched as this socialist utopia. Its headquarters was in San Francisco. My dad was 14 in 1969, which was another peak cult era in the US, quite like now, a time of social and cultural tumult. It was 1969 when my dad's dad, who was a card-carrying communist and sort of pseudo-intellectual and kind of a beatnik, wanted in on that countercultural movement. And so he forced my dad to join this group called Synanon, which started out as a drug rehabilitation center, actually, and then later grew to accommodate so-called lifestylers, or people who were just interested in an alternative way of life. And Synanon was this
commune where you thought you were joining to improve your life in the way that you joined NXIVM, but as it turned out, it was quite abusive and conformist. And I grew up on these stories, and the most fascinating part of Synanon to me was always the language, how, people who joined voluntarily were referred to as lifestylers. And when people were broken up, when couples were broken up and reassigned new partners, that was called a love match. Well, the centerpiece of life in Synanon was this nightly activity that everybody was coerced to participate in called The Game. Actually, the troubled teen industry, if anyone is familiar with that, the industry that like Paris Hilton is now speaking out against, incidentally, was based on Synanon and The Game. So The Game was this nightly ritual where everybody would have to gather around in a circle and subject one another to vicious interpersonal criticism by their peers. So this went on for hours every evening. It was mandatory. It would be the sort of thing where, we would gather in a circle like this, and I would be like, Nippy, you motherfucker, this is role play.
I didn't know we were going to go here today.
Yeah. I would be like, I see you skulking around here, you ingrate, like you need to recognize how lucky you are to be here. So
feedback.
Yeah, it was
mean feedback.
It was
sounds familiar for
vitriolic.
sure.
Yeah, it was this vitriolic feedback. And this is an activity that is by no means exclusive to Synanon. Similar activities went on in Jonestown. There it was called catharsis meetings. Actually, even Amazon employees are encouraged to malign one another's ideas just for the sake of it in meetings. So this is an activity that you see in this wide range of cultish groups from, Jim Jones to Jeff Bezos.
And guess what? In NXIVM too. Ours was called, this is not in anything we've talked about before, rating and ranking. So what that looked like, all of our tech or our classes were in small breakout groups. So imagine the four of us in a circle, and we'd get a list of things before we discussed what we were actually there to discuss in the room. We had a list of traits: most attractive, most honest, most intellectual. There was 5 things. And so it would sound like, and we'd all write it down, we'd rate each person from most to least. And so it sounds something like, Amanda, I think you're the most attractive. Sarah, I think you're the second most attractive. Nippy, I think you're the least.
Oh, man.
Can you imagine?
Wait, you would say it out loud like
you
that?
said it out loud.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And everyone ran around in the circle, and it was like, Nippy, I think you're the most intelligent, and so forth. And it was heartbreaking, but it was feedback. And guess what? In NXIVM, all feedback's valid.
Yeah.
Ultimate form of gaslighting. You have to accept all feedback. So that was our version of the game.
You can see how that's ripe for abuse.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about these activities. What was it called again?
Rating and ranking.
Rating and ranking. So it's pitched as a form of group therapy. It's building character. It's stimulating you intellectually, but really it's a form of social control. It's there to create chaos beneath so that those at the top can remain in control.
Absolutely.
So what was your initial impression of NXIVM and the language and philosophy?
Yeah. Well, I was first sent articles that were exposing the NXIVM story for the first time in 2017 by my literary agent. Incidentally, I was not writing cultish yet. I didn't even have the idea for cultish, but I had always been so fascinated in cults because of my dad, and particularly in the language of cults because my background's in linguistics, and that's just sort of like the lens through which I hear the world. So I remember my first impression being like, oh, NXIVM, this is sort of like multi-level marketing meets Tony Robbins meets Scientology.
Yeah, you
right.
kind of nailed it. And throw in a little bit of New Age, pretending not to be New Age.
Exactly.
Right.
Oh, precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was clear in the language that was used.
Where do you think it came from? Knowing that Keith stole from other places. Where did he take from?
I mean, Scientology was clearly Keith Raniere's main source of inspiration. I mean, L. Ron Hubbard, he was a visionary. He was like J.R.R. Tolkien, who could have just written a series of sci-fi books. He took it way too far and turned it into a religion. But he created a really exhaustive linguistic world that Keith was clearly inspired by, language like suppressives and tech and courses. L. Ron Hubbard would take the language from technical fields like computer science and linguistics, and he would, deliberately twist the meanings. He would bastardize the words. He would co-opt them and give them these specific cult meanings. And Keith clearly liked that and saw the value in that. And so he did that too. EMs were the NXIVM equivalent of auditing. So he definitely took inspiration from Scientology. And then you're saying New Age Age disguised as not New Age. Keith Raniere, I think he's like very explicit in saying like, this is not woo-woo stuff. Like, this is science.
Yeah, this is data-based.
This is database.
Based
And
on, yeah.
we see this marriage of sort of mystical woo-woo sounding language with the language of science in so many areas of our culture. We certainly see it in the way that mental health is spoken about on social media in particular. We see it in our corporate offices. We see it in like our fitness classes, talk of like actualization and paradigm shifts and limiting beliefs. This sort of metaphysical rhetoric can create the impression that the speaker is tapped into a power that transcends science. And it's something that we see pervading countless corners of our culture, which really says something about how cultish we've all become.
Right.
100%.
Have always been.
Or have always been.
Yeah.
And now like our society is really like bringing it out to the nth degree.
Yeah.
Okay, if audiences can take home one word, what should it be?
Well, there is this one linguistic technique that I outline in the book. It's the sort of thing where once you understand what it is, you're not going to be able to unhear it. It's called the thought terminating cliche. This is a cult language method that all these cult leaders from across the cultish spectrum use. This is a phrase that was coined in the early 1960s by a psychologist named Robert J. Lifton. And it describes a sort of stock expression that is easily memorized, easily repeated, and aimed at shutting down independent thinking or questioning. So a thought terminating cliche that was used in Synanon was act as if. If you wanted to express any kind of dissent or pushback, the enemy to any cult, you would be quickly met with the phrase act as if. And that meant you need to act as if you believe in the leader of Synanon. His name was Chuck Dederich. You need to act as if you believe in Chuck Dederich's tech, to use a Nexium or Scientology terminology, until you do, because he is all-knowing and surely you will. In QAnon, thought-terminating cliches might sound like trust the plan or don't let yourself be ruled by fear. Thought-terminating cliches also pervade our everyday lives. They sound like boys will be boys. It's all in God's plan. Thought-terminating cliches in Nexium, and you can speak to this better than I, would sound like, dismissing a valid concern or piece of dissent as a limiting belief or a negative emotion as a disintegration, saying, well, you need to journal on it as a way to reckon with some emotion that you were clearly experiencing that was your problem, not the problem of the group, your problem. And that's a form of gaslighting in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And the other phrase I heard a lot and even said myself was, how does that relate to your life issue? If somebody brought something up, just flip it back on them.
Yeah, it flips it back on you. It causes you to stop thinking critically temporarily enough that the person at the top can remain in power. And it's also really effective because it alleviates cognitive dissonance, or that uncomfortable discord you feel when you're at once like, something is amiss. My instincts are telling me that something is very, very wrong here. But at the same time, I've dedicated years and so much money and so much bandwidth and so much hope to this group that I don't want these instincts to be true. So when someone says, well, that's just a limiting belief, or act as if, or it's all in God's plan. That puts that cognitive dissonance to bed long enough that you'll submit for a little while. And none of us are immune to that.
We tell our stories. We change the world. A Little Bit Culty is proud to support the #IGotOut project, which empowers survivors of cultic abuse to share their stories online as a catalyst for education, prevention, and healing. Learn more about the #IGotOut movement and find resources at igotout.org.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it? Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like, I'm in Vancouver right now, and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. Hashtag cold pools, hashtag crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me, and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it, and I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty.
Since reading your book, we've seen it everywhere in a lot of interviews. And we had one, actually, the podcast
Drops today.
dropped today called Preacher Boys, about the
Independent fundamentalist Baptists.
well done.
Okay, well,
And in one of the scenarios, one person was complaining about how a pastor was sexually abusing a younger girl. And the thought-terminating cliche that he shared with us is, be better, not bitter.
yes. There are always these
And
stuck expressions
so-
or
It's
veins.
very
The
upsetting.
alliteration too.
Mhm.
Very
And
nefarious.
it's normally from someone that you hold in esteem.
Of course.
Right? So
And then it's internalized by everyone else in the group. It becomes this default.
And within the ranking system as well that keeps it in place. It always comes from someone above. And so because you're below, you have to take it for what it is because you can't question it. Otherwise, you're a defector and then you're shunned and your life is over and you're nothing.
Well, the whole entire hierarchy is null and void,
Right.
which it really is
Yeah.
in reality. And that's a hard thing for people who've bought in so much to reconcile.
Of course. And now at this point, you know, this group's buzzwords and us, them labels, charged metaphors, euphemisms. This is the only way you know how to talk at this point. Not all of a sudden, but slowly and surely. And the thought terminating cliche is something that I swear, like, you're going to notice it cropping up on social media
this one
and
I
in
hear-
politics everywhere else.
I'm totally allergic to it. It is what it is.
It is what it
that
is
one
the
just- ugh.
worst. It is what it is. You can hear like mafia bosses being like, it is what it is.
I like that accent.
Good.
Did you have a chaps my
Here all
ass
day.
about that, Sarah?
Oh, wow.
Well, should I-
Yes, I do. I
And-
do
oh, wait,
have a chaps
For
my
those
ass.
people who don't know what chaps my ass is, it's a segment in our podcast because it's dark shit that we're talking about. So we have to lighten it up every now and then. And early on, Nippy had it. You know what chaps my ass? And then it's just become a segment.
Yeah. And I can footnote it. It's from
Yeah.
Dumb and Dumber.
Oh, well, that makes it even better.
Really? I didn't know the reference.
Yes, cite your references.
Trivia.
Well, you know, it just-
A
it
little
I don't
bit
know if we
culty
should share
trivia.
that, actually.
it was
but-
a monster that got out of control, and then I felt guilty because everyone was like, "Oh, you're funny," and I'm really not in this case. It's someone else's joke. So
So what chaps your ass, Sarah, about language?
Okay, so when it comes to the language and fanaticism behind, this stuff, I really am starting to get annoyed by the word gaslighting suddenly casting such a wide net as to become meaningless. So when I first arrived in Austin, I went out for some pizza and I was just hearing some chatter around the table about how the song by Shaggy, It Wasn't Me,
Wasn't me.
is gaslighting.
Right,
Like, that's
right.
a song about gaslighting. It's a joke song.
Yeah.
And also, he's just not taking responsibility.
Well,
right.
right. Okay.
Which-
So
yeah.
this comes up a lot. Whenever anyone asks me, like, what is a corner of culture that is like coming up as something dangerously cultish that we all need to pay attention to? And my answer is always social media therapy speak.
Right.
Because
Nailed it.
terms, very specific terms, not all therapy speak, but certain terms like gaslighting, narcissism, love bombing, boundaries, anxiety, toxic, trauma, most definitely trauma, are becoming watered down and used in a way that can be taken advantage of in a toxic way. So, or in a cultish way. So, right. In part, this is a good thing because conversations about mental health are becoming destigmatized and more popular. We're all, acknowledging that your emotions in your past can affect who you are. But like the mental health crisis is the exact form of vulnerability that certain cultish leaders, even if they're just social media influencers, are want to take advantage of. And when you water down diagnostic terminology like gaslighting, which describes a very specific campaign that a person will go on to cause you to mistrust your very valid reality, mistrust your own thoughts. And now people are just using it, as an extreme form of lying or blame shifting.
A disagreement even.
A disagreement. Yeah, a misunderstanding. I talk about this in Cultish. So I think, people, are at once craving stronger language to describe certain, abuses or disagreements that we're seeing. The word lying is like not strong enough anymore. Now we have to call it gaslighting. The problem is that when this terminology becomes so vague and so broad and misunderstood that people can take advantage of it and people can, write off certain experiences like that's just your trauma speaking.
To be fair, though, I do also use gaslighting a little too widely sometimes.
Yeah,
we're all kind of guilty of it, but
Yeah,
I do
for
feel
sure.
like sometimes it goes just a little bit beyond the line, and I'm just like, okay, let's
It can be weaponized, I think, is the problem.
Absolutely. It can be weaponized.
We end every episode with a segment where I give an example of gaslighting. So you can pretty much pick any domain, pick a topic, and make the obvious sound profound in a lot of ways, and then say something that is confusing to you that you get to challenge yourself, but really don't resolve it.
It's called word salad.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for that. Amanda, is there anything that you didn't get to put in your book in Cultish that you wish you had?
Oh my God, yes. Well, because the book covers this wide array of groups that we may not all agree are full-blown cults, but at the very least can agree are cultish and how they use cultish language, which is a play on words, you get it? And how they use language to manipulate us all for good and for ill. There were like countless groups that I didn't get to include. Everything from like celebrity mega churches to Greek life. But that's why I have my podcast Sounds Like a Cult because I get
Did
to
you
talk
do
about
a Greek life?
We did a Greek life
We have a Greek
episode.
life coming too.
Oh, nice.
We can have battle
Snap.
of the Greek life cult sorority extravaganza.
So
Follow both
culty.
on Instagram
Yeah.
and
Our
wherever you get your podcast.
Yes, thank you.
our podcasts are cool because they're very different. They come from very different angles.
But they're complementary.
I think so too.
Yeah.
We should sell them as a box set.
Make DVDs.
I don't know. Mixtapes.
Yeah.
Okay, Sarah, your turn. Okay, so like I said, Sarah was the only person who sat in the courtroom.
One of the only.
One
Sat
of the
in
only
our
people.
apartment and then the courtroom.
Yeah,
She was the
first
only
she sat in
person-
our apartment. So after we did the New York Times, Sarah was the first person I went to with Vice and sat with her and told her my story. And she was like, what happened? You got branded and you asked for it? I don't understand. So it was a long conversation. We got to know each other very well. She sat in the courtroom every day. What was that like to go in there and paint the picture for us who weren't there?
It's a lot to go back there. It was very surreal. It was very early morning. So we were getting up before dawn to line up. Of course, there was already a media circus outside the courthouse. Once you got into the courtroom, there's Keith Raniere. He's there at the defense table. He's got a team of lawyers surrounded him. And he, of course, is very active in his own defense, because he's the smartest man in the world, right, guys?
He's also a lawyer. I mean, not a lawyer. He thinks he's a lawyer.
No, even more than his lawyers. So he's doing these little Post-it notes and he's passing them off to all his different lawyers and he's whispering in court, And actually the judge was calling him out for that. He was like, stop it. You can't whisper during the testimony. But there was a shift, definitely, I would say, when Lauren Salzman, your best friend and the person who recruited you into DOS, the secret group, which included branding, when she got up into the stand, it was kind of scary. Keith sort of switched into this almost statue mode. He was staring into her soul and almost commanding her telepathically. That's what it looked like to me anyway. And it did look like it was affecting her. Like she was a little bit crumpled on the stand. And I could tell that she was not far along in her healing. She was still using the Nexium language sort of on the stand. Like that's still how she thought. She had this cultish language in her head, and that was how she was still navigating the situation. Because she didn't wake up until 2018, almost 2019 before the trial. I think it was like
a year and a half after we left.
A couple months even before the trial, she was still, coming to terms with what had happened to her.
just to add one thing, the fact that she woke up was such a godsend to me because I was supposed to testify and I had a newborn. And so I didn't want to go to the trial and have to like breastfeed and testify against Keith Raniere because I was testifying really against Lauren because that was my interface. So when she woke up, that was, I mean,
Wow.
I've totally forgiven her because of that. And for me, just like no hard feelings now.
She really gave it 110%, but it was, a sort of point of confusion and weakness. But then after Lauren, Daniela came to the stand. And so Daniela was one of 3 sisters who Raniere sexually manipulated. And she just had so much more healing behind her. And so she was able to be just completely confident, completely ignore Keith Raniere. He sort of disappeared off to the side. And she got to tell her survivor story, which was really, really powerful. So being in the room for that, where she got to tell her truth and just really not be affected by him at all was one of the, just really intense moments. And I couldn't get out of the courtroom fast enough to call you about it, so we could hear from your perspective what was going on, because I assumed you had known these things.
No.
And actually it wasn't the case.
Well, Sarah would FaceTime us. So we'd be on camera and then I'd have a camera from The Vow season 2. Don't know when it's coming out. Sorry. Filming us and filming her in Brooklyn. And then she was telling me things Nippy and I thought we were inner circle. We totally were not inner circle. And there was all this shit that we found out, in real time. Well, not real time because you found it in real time. I found it in FaceTime afterwards. And it was heartbreaking. I mean, people that we thought were...
that we saw
on a day-to-day basis that were getting physically, sexually, mentally abused, and we had no idea
for a long time.
Yeah, so much to put together.
What was it like to see what we call the loyalists, the people who are still loyal to Keith Raniere? Did you interface with them? Did you talk to them at all?
Yeah, so they would sit in the back, always on Keith Raniere's side, and they only showed up for the cross-examination. So that's when Keith Raniere's lawyers are actually asking the questions. So that was sort of a weird cameo every once in a while. And they definitely tried not to interact with anybody. They, at that time, were very scared of journalists. After the sentencing, that sort of changed because they were shilling their new organizations, but that's another story. And then you had the whistleblowers, right? So the early NXIVM whistleblowers, you had Toni Natali, who left in 1999. She would always sit on the back inside aisle. And then right across the aisle, that would be Barbara Boucher, who left in 2009. And they had been speaking out about NXIVM for so long at this point, 10 years, 20 years. And they both had really interesting perspectives. So Barbara was telling me all about how there were good things that kept people there. It was not just manipulation and abuse. That was there for sure, she acknowledges. But she really wanted to stress to me that 90% of people who came through actually got something good from NXIVM. And that was blowing my mind. And then Toni Natali is saying it was 100% fraud from the beginning, just all a lie, all based on lies. And to some extent, I had to hold both of those things in my head at the same time. And I started to really see the truth in both perspectives. And then, of course, you had just the wall of media, right? So you had your HBO team, you had your CNN, your New York Times, your Albany Times Union. And so I was very much like, the Albany Times Union and CNN crew. We sort of formed a clique. But it was a lot every day. It was long, long days.
I commend you.
Thank you
for your service to humanity.
Next question. What was your goal going into the trial?
Right. So I had a lot coming in my head. So I was trying to keep as open a mind as possible, to almost be like one of the jurors and to make sure that all the evidence comes in before I really, try to make a call on what has taken place here. I did know that cults are notoriously hard to prosecute. They often get away with these things. And it's often because it's lying. Like the mythology of a cult leader is often just based on lies. And a lie isn't necessarily a crime.
It reminds me so much, well, I talk about this sometimes, but it reminds me so much of an abusive relationship. Like legally, you can only really prosecute physical abuse, but psychological and emotional abuse can have just as deleterious effects.
And it seems like that's changing, and we're going to do a podcast about that. We're going to do it first,
Yes.
Amanda. You can do it second, okay?
So there's so many things that just aren't a crime, right? Running a cult, not a crime. Branding, also not a crime. The Keith Raniere loyalists would point that out to you, right? If they were here. And so I really wanted to try and find where the moral line was, because I'd heard from you and I'd heard from so many people about these just harrowing experiences of manipulation and gaslighting that, did the legal line up with that? And I was trying to figure that out. I honestly didn't know which way it was going to go. Even to the last day, it wasn't totally clear to me. And I had to keep an open mind to, okay, this might go one of many ways. And it just so happened that he was found guilty and he's now sentenced to 120 years.
So
in prison.
legal system works sometimes.
Sometimes.
It's got some flaws in there, but it did seem to, in this case, line up with where people's gut feelings were.
What did you think about that when the judge gave him 120? Hashtag 120 is sort of our theme, in case you missed that hashtag.
I haven't seen that hashtag.
Oh,
I'm going to look for it.
It's a thing, yeah.
Y'all have a lot of hashtags going on.
I know.
She's got a lot of
We're trying to
hashtags
reel it in.
It's hard not to. Cult of hashtags.
Still
Try 'em all.
tic-tac-toe to me.
Hashtag don't call it a cult. Hashtag cultish. Hashtag scarred.
Yeah, so that day, I would say, we had heard just all these victim impact statements, and it really did sound like a lot. It was all of us, I think, in the courtroom were reeling. Yeah, so it did seem like a lot stacked on top of a lot more. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise, but it was certainly the biggest sentence that I've ever heard in a courtroom, like times 5. So
We would have been happy with life in prison, and 120 really seals the deal.
yeah. It really
He probably
was a
thinks he could
statement.
live longer than that.
Yeah, he probably thinks he can.
Yeah, wasn't he researching freezing his own head or something?
No, he was obsessed with, what's it called?
Cryogenics.
Yeah.
Cryogenics.
Yeah.
Do you know that he has 5 years probation after that sentence?
120 years and 5 years probation? That is just, I don't know what do
Seems
you
a
do
little
with that?
bit
The
silly.
justice system is he needs probation.
Yeah. If he lives that long, we'll let him out.
Uh,
Get some sunshine.
Yeah, it's federal too, so you can't get out for good behavior.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, you can't until you've done 90% of the sentence. So
I don't think he's going
it's going
to
to work
have
out for
good
him.
behavior. He's never really demonstrated
I still live with a little bit of the fear that because he's so strategic, he'll find a way to weasel his way out of there somehow. But that makes me feel
That's
better.
not how prison works.
Okay, good. Thanks.
I've heard that escaping from prison is kind of hard.
Yeah. I don't know. Let's find out.
It is maximum security.
How did your perspective change after the course of the trial?
Yeah, I feel like every day it was changing. It just every day another bombshell was dropped, right? Like you heard another secret relationship and you heard about another set of abuses hidden behind closed doors. And it was really shocking to me that you guys didn't know. We went over that a little bit. But it definitely came clear to me that the people who were most close to Keith Raniere and the people with the least power in the organization, they were the ones who were abused the most. So you had Camilla, who was Daniela's younger sister, also sexually abused by Keith at age 15, was kept into a secret apartment building where even her family and friends didn't know the location because that was their home or, a hiding place for an undocumented migrant, you could
And this was
use
this
both
trio
those.
of sisters, right?
Right.
Yes, exactly. Who bore the brunt of these terrible abuses. And so nobody knew about that. Not even Lauren seemed to know the extent of the Cammie allegations. She knew about the Daniela stuff, but everything was so compartmentalized. It was just this scary facade narrative that just fell apart week after week. So it was a 6-week trial. We heard about Cammie maybe 4 weeks into this, and that was truly the gut punch. That was the time where the perspective really changed for me that yes, there is fraud and coercion everywhere. The pattern really started to click together at that point.
And for those who don't know, it was 7 counts he was convicted of, and one of them was sex trafficking. And that, I think, was the thing that really was his downfall is, well, obviously starting DOS and developing this whole women's group and then branding women with his initials, but getting women across state lines to join was how he was essentially caught. Is that accurate?
That was part of it.
Yeah.
This case was groundbreaking in a whole bunch of ways. It did pair racketeering and
Right.
sex trafficking together in a very new way. So racketeering is usually, used to take down mafia bosses. And in this case, it was the conspiracy aspect and the fact that some of the women below him didn't know necessarily what the left hand or the right hand was doing. They were all compartmentalized, but it was one conspiracy. And that essentially was what brought him down, was pairing these two legal precedents together. And now that's actually become a roadmap for future cases.
R. Kelly, and now the Sarah Lawrence College case, which is coming out soon.
Yeah.
And if the Epstein ever...
And Epstein, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything you wish you could have kept in your book that you had to cut?
Not something that I had to cut, but something that happened after it came out. So my book came out in April 2021. And in the fall of 2021, we learned of this very interesting friend that Keith made in prison.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so this was someone who had been convicted of doing a film scam, who had pretended to be a producer and stole people's money. That's what put him in prison with Keith. And for some reason, Keith befriended this person, decided maybe he wanted to make a film about his perspective on Nexia. And so his followers wired this man $700,000. That man got out of prison, ran off, got some yachts, I think, or
paid off some debts.
Paid off some debts. Yeah, sent his kids to college or something.
Paid his ex-wife.
So when someone tells you who they are, believe them.
Yeah.
So I thought that would have been a really light epilogue to the whole story because it ends on a really dark note, but couldn't include that because it happened after the release. But if I were going to say from the heart, like what I truly, truly wish I could have included more of, I would say it was more about the good in Nexia. Those things Barbara was saying that I was kind of ignoring at the time. I was very focused on, pointing out the fraud. I thought that was so important, like that's where the crime is. But I do think that people get nuggets from these groups. They stay for reasons that are beyond the manipulation, and that's true. And that's sort of why I love that you guys are doing this podcast. I feel like you have the space to go through those things, bit by bit. So yeah, more power to you to do that.
Thank you, Sarah. That means a lot to us. We do like to share those nuggets sometimes because otherwise people just think we're crazy. Why would you join something that's abusive?
Well, it allows you to forgive yourself. It allows us all to forgive ourselves when we find out that we allowed ourselves to stay in a toxic situation. It's because it wasn't toxic to begin with. There was good there, or else no one would join and no one would stay.
Exactly. Hey, culty listeners, lovers of cult busting content, ALBCers, culty kids. We've gotten a lot of requests to put up a link where people can throw some funds up behind the podcast and help support what Little Bit Culty is doing. And you know what? That's a great idea. Thank you for that. And as we've gotten to know other podcasters and learn more about this whole podcast thing, we've been learning that it takes a whole lot of different resources and different sources of revenue and listener support to keep it rolling. Sponsorships and ads and the occasional appeal to amazeballs listeners like you. That's why we added a way for anyone who wants to support the show to do exactly that. You can go to littlebitculty.com/support or the link in our Instagram bio, or smash that link in our show notes to make a one-time contribution or a recurring one. We will pay your support forward with a galactic level of love and light and healing resources, of course. Again, it's littlebitculty.com/support or check out the link in our Instagram bios. Next up, we really got to figure out what to call you, our listenership. ALBC Nation? Flying Monkeys? We're going to have to workshop that. Thanks, guys.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, so
now
I think
you-
we get to turn the tables
Yes.
here.
First
Okay.
time.
So I think the audience just wants to know, what is it like being at the center of an HBO documentary, 9 parts, watched by millions? What is that like for you two?
It was surreal. I mean, you got to understand, we were watching it in real time with the rest of the world. Some things I don't even remember being at, let alone that we were filmed. So that's seeing it again for the first time. And there was a lot of footage for things that we were behind closed doors that we never saw to begin with. So we were watching it with our mouths on the floor also. And it was, I mean, to be totally honest, I was in fight or flight the whole time. I was there with some couple friends who were also ex-Nexium members, and we were holding each other's hands, and then we'd like have to pause and stop and cry and what the fuck, that kind of commentary. But overall, I'd say it was very validating. I think the filmmakers did a wonderful job of showing what we thought we were a part of. Who's here seen The Vow? Just curious. Okay, so most of you seen The Vow. All right, so
A lot of hands.
I think it did a good, and most of my friends who thought I was in a cult or whatever said to me, I get it now. I get why you joined. Like that first episode, I want to be a part of that. And then it takes a steep turn, right? And you go, oh, maybe I'm glad I didn't join it. But I think that it allowed for the world to go on the journey with us of like, yes, this great thing. And then what is it like to recognize you're part of something bad? How do you reconcile that? How do you get out? What's your responsibility that you take? Do you bring people with you? Do you our decision to become whistleblowers, I think, is documented there quite well. And it's a little scrapbook in a way that I can, maybe one day show my kids and explain what happened to us. Overall, it was a really good experience. Also harrowing, for sure.
And I just want to know, maybe you don't feel this way. It's a weird question, but did you kind of feel like you had to put on a role because you were being watched, because you had this audience? Did you have to put yourself on the line in sort of we were in a war.
Yeah.
There was no time for acting. I mean, I may have been like, let me put some lip balm on or something, but I wasn't really thinking about that. There were some times where it was a little bit more, okay, guys, you have a meal and then talk. You can probably see that in The Vow it's not contrived, but it wasn't like, it's not a reality TV show.
Sometimes you're just going to have to do that.
Yeah. But
for me, I wasn't excited about having my personal life become other people's entertainment. Like that was, and I think it reads that way a little bit. Also, I knew I was in a little bit of trauma. I mean, you have to understand this, for 6 to 7 months before Keith got arrested, we were having shrapnel thrown into our central nervous systems. I mean, it was kind of like an airplane flight. You're fine, you're good, it's going away. And then you hit turbulence and you're like, God.
Yeah.
And it kind of felt like, when's this going to end? It was just cumulative. And I didn't like that being on camera. And I also was extremely protective of her and having, people take shots at her, that pissed me off. I didn't like that.
What were some of the shots, if you don't mind?
Just, victim, just, you're an idiot for doing, stuff like that. People who are advertising and demonstrated they haven't been through trauma themselves and were punching down.
People who want to tell themselves the story that we all want to tell, which is that I would never fall victim to that. I would never be susceptible
obviously,
to that.
if I was a sociopath and I was a Keith Raniere and I heard someone say that, I'd target them because that means you don't understand what it looks like and sounds like.
That's actually one of the things quick sidebar, I really like about your book, Amanda, is that you really bring empathy to our journey. I cried really hard in your book because you really, make that a real human thing, that we're looking for community and looking for meaning. And that's a normal, okay thing.
It's profoundly human.
Yeah, it's profoundly human. And that wasn't the case with the New York Times. Like when the New York Times.
It was very clinical assessment of it. And
sensational.
Somewhat judgmental too.
And I would be judgmental too.
Yeah, no,
right?
I was judgmental of myself for a while.
Yes.
I mean, I get it. I get the natural questions that come from it. And we've fielded them as best we could. And also having a kid. I didn't want to have the backdrop of my then at the time 3-year-old kid be us getting out of this thing. And it was very like, how am I going to protect what I kind of felt like I wasn't able to protect initially? And I didn't really have an outlet of a natural primal response where I got to face the person who abused my wife and the people. And I really had to kind of sit on my hands. And people who knew me reached out to me and were like, dude, like, how are you? I know you. And like one of my friends who I met in town is like, I'm sitting with my girlfriend watching this and Nippy doesn't fuck around. I don't know how he's not like in there. Like, and, I had to kind of sit on that and, it was a lesson of humility and really swallowing your pride. And ultimately I got to the point where I recognized the only thing that's hurting right now is my pride.
You guys were really strategic though. Like the way you left was very strategic. I don't want to
We
spoil
were,
anything.
We were lucky
We had
in making
people-
a lot of really good decisions in a short amount of
Yeah.
time that culminated in his arrest in under a year.
Yeah. And it was a team. Like people are like, oh, you took down Nexium. Like we're two of 5 whistleblowers and then many whistleblowers before us. And it just so happened that this was captured, in the way that it was.
And I'll say this, the brand and that stuff, the stuff that we ended up hearing about and we get criticized by the loyalists for being sensational was the thing that got the attention. And it was a physical manifestation of all the emotional abuse that had gone on.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it takes a physical thing for us to start to considering the emotional aspect.
Right.
Of
It was such a symbol.
So
Yeah,
It
I mean,
was.
that's why I decided to show it, because I knew that without that, it wouldn't be we had no idea it was going to go as fast as it did. We thought we were going to be 5-10 years dealing with Keith and going to court and testifying. It happened fast, and that was a huge
Part of
relief.
it is because you told your story so well.
Thank you.
I don't know how you had
Well,
the reflection that quickly, but
I second that.
I've had a lot of conversations about this, and Sarah, those who know me, I never talked in the mystical kind of, manifest light, all that stuff. But when it happens to you, no, this is serious. When you have that experience and you have something of being a part of something so dark, there's a chiropractic term. You don't know how much pain you're in until it's gone. I didn't know how much dark had a hold of us until we were out of it. And then the light that showed up and the people that showed up, some of them in this room, and I consider you guys that, you ushered in, some pretty amazing stuff, and it restored my faith in a lot of ways. So to have that happen to you, I'm talking in those terms. I'm embracing them, a little bit more these
It
days.
took getting
So,
out
yeah.
to be able to use it.
And it was hard. It was really hard to watch and hear you come out of the trial and hear that was the stuff going in the background, and I couldn't do anything about it. I was rubbing elbows with people that were being abused and didn't know it, while going out and professing how great it was. It was, it was an about face that, we both had to do. So
It was totally upside down. I totally got that sense too.
So to further your question, like I had a love-hate relationship with being interviewed, because I also recognized if I don't tell my story, someone else is.
yeah.
And I've got the wisdom, and I've got, I think, the capacity to take and articulate what happened into sound bites and wisdom that other people can go forth and put it into, we live in a time where you can do it in your living room, which is great. We don't have to get on a flight and do that in our story.
Except for right now.
Yeah. Well, we want to do that. If you were telling me, I can remember, I was like, is this going to be the next 4 to 5, 10 years of our life? And we're in a festival right now telling our story to people to help them with their lives. And we got to continue what we thought we were doing. We're actually doing it. So.
Okay, let me ask something a little bit lighter.
Okay.
Well, it's not going to sound light at first, but that's the vibe. So a lot of cult survivors that I spoke to, survivors of some of the most notorious groups like Jonestown and Heaven's Gate, they had this pattern where they would, it was hard to quit cultishness entirely. They just had this like communal aspect to them. They had this optimism that they like weren't ready to give up on the idea that something culty could actually be good. And I'm just wondering if either of you have ever had any brushes with other culty groups, either before Nexium or after Nexium.
I have. Surprise, surprise. The community seeking, the couple things. Camp that I went to that had a pretty strong dogma.
Oh my God, camp?
Yes.
Theater camp?
Theater
I went
camp.
to the cultiest theater camp.
Yes, that's for sure. That's a thing. And then I was like, I, again, didn't go deep, but I went to Bikram's. And I probably would have stayed had it not smelled so bad in those rooms. But now that I know, it was very militant, and it was and it turned out. I mean, if you saw the Bikram doc, it's legitimately a cult, in my opinion, allegedly.
Yeah, it is cultish.
Cultish for sure. And then I also was in an acting program, which I'm also going to do an episode about if I can just find someone to interview, because everyone's so scared of the leader still, the teacher. And I left that ironically before Nexium, and I said it was culty. I said, but I didn't understand why it was culty until now, after all my cult education post Nexium. Somehow I managed to see that program was a cult, but Nexium wasn't a cult.
Well, our spidey senses tingle for different things.
Yeah.
It's like, I grew up with this cult survivor in the family and all these stories. So I was like, I'll never join a group. But then, I've been in an emotionally abusive relationship. So my spidey senses were not tingling for the cult of one dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that's common.
I think it goes also to how you got involved. Like I was particularly allergic to a lot of those things, but and it's always case by case. Like, I had a girlfriend I used to date from high school. She told me about it. Her dad, who had gone to Yale and was a brain surgeon, had done it. She had said that. And I was like, your dad did it? And I'd known her dad since I was 15. So there was a lot of endorsement from other people. When I got there, it didn't pass my eyeball test. It was Vanguard, sashes, and bowing. And I was like, I pieced out originally but there was some positive things about it. And so in conjunction with like some heartstrings that were being pulled, I gave it a little bit of a chance. And then I left after about a year, and then I got called back to work on a project.
A film project.
So my indoctrination was roundabout and different. And I think that's kind of how it happens. And it wasn't bad enough. And I didn't see anything there to go, I'm not going to write this off. And the community had grown into something where it can merge kind of the growth aspect and, creative aspect.
Well, even Scientology, I mean, the introductory courses that you take are not like an alien is infecting your soul. It's like communication, ups and downs in life.
Right.
Something any of us can get on board with.
It's a slow burn.
Totally. Are there any scenes that didn't make the cut of season 1 of The Vow that you wish had been kept?
Yes. So your imitation. For those who
that's
don't know, Nippy does incredible imitations of people. And he would be asked all the time, and next to him would be like, do David, or do this guy, do Cedric. And he'd like walk around and would laugh. And so they asked him to do an
It was like a
impression.
jester.
Yeah, he's a court jester next to him.
SNL over here.
And he did this impression of Keith. And we
At his birth?
No, it was at Nancy's birthday. That we like practiced it, and he did this like whole
No.
10-minute.
Allison Mack came up to me about an hour beforehand and said, we're doing this kind of skit. We need someone to impersonate Keith, and I hear you have a good impression.
And he did it.
So I just went up there and I winged it.
Let's hear it.
Well, you have to see it.
Just give us a little.
Well, he has
I'm
like
totally
these,
putting him on the spot. He's going to hate me
Yeah.
after this.
I think it's in my book. It's
Oh, it
like
is?
slow plug for my book. I remember quoting you doing it. It was like it involved the walnut inside your head
Well,
or
that was
something
the actual.
in a space
That was the actual
theme.
one.
It just sounded very profound, but it was completely
It was
meaningless.
nothing.
Yeah,
A word
and that's
salad,
a
you
lot of
might
the word
say.
salad. So he'll take like I don't know, sir, you kind of got me here.
Sorry.
I wish I could.
It's interesting. What's interesting? Being in
Well,
a
it's all mannerisms too, and the mannerisms are specific. So he'll sit up and he'll look at the audience and he'll look down and he'll do something big. It's interesting if
He's got this like schoolboy
and
demeanor.
and he does like the
Totally.
glasses, and he's like, "Are there questions?" I look at the world, and I recognize that there's a certain amount of people, and if you subscribe to the notion that say we have 80% of the world that we call non-ethical people, and we have a percentage of the world over here that we consider unethical people, bad people per se, and you have 10% over here that we consider wanting to make the world a better place. Do you think that the unethical people don't talk? And you're like, I don't fucking
pretty
know.
precise.
I feel like, oh
Maybe,
man.
you know?
It's great because I feel like I fell asleep and woke back up like in the middle of that.
Right.
Even
Well,
the way he'll like invent statistics
Yeah.
where I'm just like, yeah, math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Yeah, unethical people talk.
That's
So-
actually a technique of NLP.
Yeah.
it is.
Like to
Yeah, yeah.
confuse someone, to get them in a logical circle where
Yeah.
they're
Right.
like, what? And they kind of zone out and they kind of just accept
Well,
whatever
and
I
we're-
said.
I thought the zoning out that I did was because I didn't get it.
Because you were not smart
Yeah,
enough.
I wasn't smart enough,
Literally, this is
A thing.
purposeful.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Where they disorient you in the word salad and in the buzzwords and such that we're so allergic to that level of internal conflict as human beings that what we have to
So
do in
well
that moment is default to the person speaking
Yes.
because it's their delivery rather than the content of their statement. It's
Yeah.
utter poppycock.
So-
But there's so many other things. I got the microphone in front of me, but like if I saw someone like sitting down, I could do something with my mannerism and look at you and you'd sit up and I'd grab you. So he was very sensitive to
Yeah, that's
who in
mirroring.
the audience
That's
was
NLP.
Also
down,
NLP.
and he'd
He
Dude.
stole everything, you guys.
He'd
For
lean
sure.
into stuff like that.
We actually
And-
were told that he could address different sides of what you called your disintegration. So like things you weren't integrated
he
on.
could talk to your
He
right
could talk
or left
to either
brain.
side of your disintegration by how he angled his voice towards your ears.
Again, tapped into a wisdom higher than science.
Right. Yeah. So this impression is out there, and we are going to, if the Vow season 2 does not release it, we will release it because it is
Yes.
amazing.
Yes.
Hell
So
yeah.
stay tuned for that.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, he goes on.
He goes on tangents. What else you got for us?
Yeah, all right. So I have a question for you guys.
Sure.
Did you feel like you had to stand in the spotlight to protect others who are still healing?
100%. Yeah. I mean,
That was a big part of it.
been mama bear from the beginning. And I knew that a lot of people, didn't want to admit that they were part of a sex cult, and I kind of just took that because I wanted to protect them. They weren't part of it. Some people were, we know that, but like Barbara Boucher was right. 90% of people got out unscathed, got tools for life, learned how to set goals and have better time management and regulate their emotions and communicate better and be happy. Great.
I have a bit of a chaps my ass that Sarah won't say, but I will.
Okay.
Yes.
As it pertains to that question, we felt responsible. Mark felt responsible. Bonnie felt responsible. We felt responsible, and this was the responsible thing to do. And there are a lot of people, not a lot, I'd say a handful of people that had a problem with how mostly Sarah did it. And they didn't come to me with that. I think they know I would be pretty quick to go tell them to go fuck themselves. It's
because of your leather jacket.
It is because of my leather jacket. It's pretty intimidating. But they made some shots at Sarah, and some of them actually had the balls to go to her and say, "You ruined my career."
Whoa.
Or
Now
whatever.
like,
I
drop the
bit
name.
my tongue so hard to go, you have no context and no perspective outside your immediate narcissism to understand that it has nothing to do with you. And there was a response, and I was like, you're not going to tell me, and I'm not asking you for permission, how I'm going to protect my family. Like, that's just not, and the lack of perspective that some people had on this was just, it was pretty daunting to just see how many people just didn't quite get it. And then there's a slew of people that did and had our backs and stuff like that because they understood it.
But apart from that, obviously there's some ego stuff, it sounds like, going on with
That
that.
was an ass chapping.
But,
Sure.
right.
Yeah.
Right. I do want to know a bit more about the folks who really were still in the trauma, in the muck, like protecting them. Sarah, can you speak to that?
So actually, I'm holding a pen from an organization called #IGotOut. If anyone here is an ex-member of anything, I have a pen for you. And use the hashtag. It's similar to the #MeToo movement, where we want to create a place where people can share their stories without shame and without stigma, which is a new thing. Like our story did come out on the heels of Me Too. And I think it was embraced in a different way because of that. And so this is something I'm really passionate about. But I feel in the way that I took responsibility was making sure people had real therapy, not fake bullshit therapy and Nexium, legal support because we were being attacked. And, in some cases, just getting back to their lives and jobs and stuff like that. I mean, I feel like I had to be the front person so that other people could. Is that what you're asking? Like, so they could go back to their lives? Yeah. It was, I'm still doing it.
Yeah. Reconciling your delusion around these things is work, and it's hard. And some people probably
most people just walked away.
Don't want to do that. Yeah.
And those people are also prone to what we now know is called cult hopping. So a lot of these people are like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. That's really bad. And next thing they know, there's one woman who is going to take a vow of lifetime obedience in a yoga cult. And I was like, get out and get some real therapy.
2 weeks later.
2 weeks later.
It's so hard to do that work, though. Like, we all have delusions that we need to confront.
Yeah.
And it's not like we can completely get rid of our delusions or that we need to. But, it is hard work to, address that stuff. And that's why what you two have done is, you make it look effortless, but it's not.
No.
I appreciate that. There's a lot of stuff that goes into the healing. And then, we talk about this in our podcast, whether it's Epsom salt baths and healing and legitimate therapy and cult education. And what are you laughing at?
No, just Epsom salt baths.
That's what I do to heal and walk time in nature and getting back into the rhythm of something more stable than like you said, the darkness. You said that really well. By the way, I'm usually the one who cries, so I'm really happy that
normally I'm dead inside.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions.
Okay, I think we have 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, perfect. Well, in that case, I'm just going to go with, what should audiences expect for season 2 of The Vow?
Ooh, well, we don't actually know because we're not producers. We're subjects, but what we've been told and what we think, so don't quote us, please, is that it's a more focus on the inner circle.
And the trial.
And at the trial. And so I don't think we're featured that much, but we don't know.
Well, once I kind of felt like our punches were thrown, I was done. I just wasn't.
And we had another kid, and we were just sort of let's.
And kids saved us.
Yes.
It took us in the moment and present. I can't even, I might even get into that because I'll start for sure crying there. We didn't really film anything past the trial in 19. I didn't go, you were pregnant, having full time with the kids. So we weren't really in it. If there's any footage that was in it, it was before June of 19.
Yeah.
So,
but we're excited to see it. I mean, I feel like that would be that would wrap things up really well.
I
for
just
us.
don't want to go through that whirlwind of media and all that.
We'll
I
just
hope
continue.
it's elsewhere and we can be spectators. Well, we
Yeah.
were spectators after about 4 episodes. We're like, can you believe that? Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Well, it probably feels so much better being in control of your own narrative with the podcast.
The
for
podcast
sure.
is very, I mean, it's good for a lot of things, especially as being actors where you have zero control. And now we can produce something that we get to make.
Yeah.
And this is an Nexium term, builds our self-esteem
Yeah.
so well. But that does happen in reality. It's not just in cults.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny because didn't Keith have a weird definition of self-esteem? It was
Yes.
like a numbers
The
game.
number of viable options you have in reality.
I gavolt.
Yeah.
This is what they do. This is what they do. They take a term that you've been using your entire life and they twist it slowly and deliberately to mean something different, such that you wake up one day and you don't speak the language that you've been speaking your entire life. You're speaking something else.
And that's such a divide, right? Like it sort of separated you guys from your colleagues and your
Yeah,
friends growing
of
up.
course.
Well, at first it felt like we were part of the secret group that we really, that felt like a club, which I think is probably my Achilles heel. I liked the eliteness of that. I have to
We
admit.
all do.
Yeah. Okay. So we do, right? And it feels fun, and I like that. But then I did feel like I was alienating myself from friends who didn't speak the same language. But because I always kept my foot in reality in Vancouver and didn't move to Albany, thank God, I was also able to speak normal language.
Yeah.
Important.
Speak normal
So
English.
important.
You know, the relationships I was able to keep were the ones my friends I stopped trying to enroll.
That's so important.
Yeah.
I had like 4 or 5 friends. I told about it. They said no. And I was like, okay, fine. And we maintained the normal
And those
course
friendships were there with open arms when we got out,
of,
saying
yeah,
we're glad you're
it
out.
was pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
No
to experience
judgment.
That. No,
Yeah.
they were like, we've been waiting. I'm like,
Yeah. People think there's so much shame. Like if I leave, I'm going to have to eat crow and no one will take me back. But they took you back.
They took me back. We did have to eat crow, and they took us back.
yeah, I mean,
It's been a journey.
it's part of it, right?
It's been a
Yeah.
journey. And one of the best silver linings, because I know we got to wrap up in 1 minute, is meeting, we never would have met you guys or being here in this amazing festival or had the opportunity to turn our pain into some sort of, purpose and wisdom. And I really appreciate all of you guys for coming. And if you want to stick around, we'll go outside.
you.
So I think we have to leave the
We have
room.
books.
But there's books and there's pens and there's
Kombucha.
kombucha.
High
Really
fives.
appreciate you guys coming. So thank you guys for coming. Have a
Thank
great
you,
rest of your
guys.
festival. Don't drink too much and don't join a cult.
Imagine yourself walking into a forest. You can see the path and the trees. High above you, the air is crisp. You are walking towards your happy place. Allegedly, say it with me. Anything said here on this podcast about alleged cults, alleged MLM schemes, alleged douchebaggery, mindfuckery, criminality, spiritual fraud, or the like is offered purely as commentary, because the views and opinions expressed on A Little Bit Culty do not necessarily reflect on official policy or position of the podcast. And any content provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business individual, anyone, or anything. So just let these words drift into your mind without needing to focus on any of them. You are great. You are capable. You deserve to be happy. Nobody's mad at you, unless you're actually a narcissistic, culty criminal. If that's you, cut that shit out. Don't be a fuckwad. But if that's not you, again, you are great. You are capable. You deserve to be happy. A Little Bit Culty loves you.
Austin is as advertised, is it not?
I had such a good time.
my
I feel like
God.
we're still recovering from the whirlwind that was our first A Little Bit Culty live in Austin, South by Southwest 2022.
It was great.
It was so
Austin
great.
is amazing city.
It was so fun. The hour went by so quick, and I just wish we had more time with those two. And we probably should do a whole other episode with Sarah on her book, because it is the most thorough,
For sure.
investigative.
I had someone come up to me after and be like, you don't know me, but I knew your family, Nippy, Louie, Dewey, and I never believed it existed. Then I saw you were doing this.
Somebody from Atlanta.
It's like, yeah, someone from Atlanta.
It's so cool. It's so cool, great to meet people in person. And I want to just add something in response to what Sarah asked me about feeling responsible to speak for the victims. And one thing I wanted to share is that I also felt like
even though it was awful, like the whole branding experience and everything, in many ways, I wasn't messed with. I didn't have the same mental manipulation done to me as many of the other women experienced. So I kind of felt like a lot of them were so much in trauma that they couldn't speak. And they were just like going into complete hermit mode and needing to shut off from the world. And I was like, okay. And I don't even know, like there's some people I still haven't even connected with, but from the conversations we've had, I feel like people appreciated that we could speak at a time that they couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if we weren't, someone else is going to tell the story and ours.
Yeah, and speaking of that, thank you to everybody who's reached out. We're like drowning in emails, and I'm sorry if we haven't gotten back right away. But to respond to a couple of the themes, yes, we are aware of the Evan Rachel Wood documentary on HBO Max. We have been in touch with her since The Vow and would love to have her on the show when the time is right for her. So yes, we're working on that, working on Landmark still, and keep sending those suggestions with as much information as possible. We always appreciate it. And
thanks everybody who made South by awesome.
Especially Natasha and Dario for so generously hosting us. Ashley Harnden from Manifesties for capturing it all on film spontaneously. And Anthony David Adams for driving us to the show in the Magic Bus.
Which we have video for. Big love to Cricket Shirts. Bill and Hob, great to reconnect. Love what you guys are building there in Austin.
Sheila Kaye, thanks for coming out. Amy and Will from Campfire Culture. Love you guys. New best friends.
Thanks, ACAST, and a special shout out to Sophia and Tiffany. Great meeting you in person. You guys rock.
As always, thanks, Will and Karis at Citizens of Sound. Will, it was so great to finally meet you after working virtually in the last year of COVID. You are awesome. And thanks, Amanda Ambrose, for jumping in and writing us some so-shmees with your unbelievably talented cousin, Just Tardy. Is it culty that we have first cousins on our writing staff? Thanks, both of you.
Not yet.
Honestly, we wouldn't have this without you. We're very grateful. Virtual hugs from Vancouver, to you, to the audience, to Ace, for being the best little 3-year-old nugget I could ask for.
See you guys next week for season 4.
Have a great week. Till next time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Let's keep the conversation going. We'll be back soon with more episodes of A Little Bit Culty with more experts and survivors. And sometimes experts who are survivors, as well as some familiar faces from The Vow from HBO. If you've got suggestions or questions on upcoming topics, find us on Instagram at A Little Bit Culty.
And for more background on what brought me here, my memoir, Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life, is available on Amazon, Audible, and where most books are sold.
If you'd like to help us spread the word about A Little Bit Culty podcast, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends to subscribe.
Seriously, take out their phone and tell them to press subscribe. It takes a second. We're also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every major listening app. And if you're listening on a smartphone, tap or swipe over the cover art of this podcast to find show notes and helpful resources.
You might also find some offers from our sponsors there. And when you support our sponsors, you help us keep this podcast going. Just don't be a little bit culty about it.
A Little Bit Culty is executive produced by me, your co-host, Sarah Edmondson, and Anthony Nippy Ames.
That's me.
Associate producer is Just Tardy. Produced, edited, mixed, and mastered by Citizens of Sound. Our amazing theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant and co-written by Nigel Asselin. I'm Sarah Edmondson, and thanks for listening to A Little Bit Culty.
What is your pre-show ritual?
I mean, yeah, occasionally I'll probably have a on stage. It loosens you up, doesn't it? What?
I'm sorry, Josie, I didn't expect you to be f***ing honest.
Oh, sorry, fair. I'm always honest.
Moving right along
Anyway,
again.
sorry. You know what I mean? Gets you loose, doesn't it?
You know what your dad does? He prays.
Does he? Mm-hmm. Does he pray? Fair. I love that. Cool.
Billboard chart-topping singer and songwriter Youngblood joins the Osbournes podcast, dropping August 13th. Listen now wherever you get podcasts.